President Trump strikes a massive trade deal with the EU. What does it mean, and why haven't we done it before? E.J. Antoni of the Heritage Foundation breaks it down in under 60 seconds.
Because you never had a president who wanted to fight for the American people before. You had a president who was always beholden to special interests. Ironically, it took the New York City billionaire to be the most connected with the average Joe, with the blue-collar worker in this country. Again, because he wasn't dependent on those different special interests. If you listen to the Europeans today who are up in arms about this news, they are the ones who stand to lose the most, because they're the ones who are so connected with those special interests in Europe that have been protected from competition for the better part of 8 decades.
All right, guys, I hope you had a great weekend. I know President Trump did. He got a lot of time on the golf course, but also big meeting with the EU, huge trade deal with massive implications for the country. We're going to explain all of that. So much to get to. He had a big meeting this morning with the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, continuing to roll. I mean, this guy, boom, 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 does not stop. The EU trade deal, though, massive, huge implications, not just for the EU and for U.S. manufacturers, service providers, ranchers and farmers, but I think for the entire trade landscape as we get ready to go through this week. August 1st deadline, big deal. Rest of the countries, you don't get a deal by then, you're out. Oh, big trouble for you folks if you don't get your deal done. Howard Lutnick making it very clear. We'll talk about all that. Huge show headed your way. First, Josh Hammer, the Article 3 Project, breaking down what progress has been made on the Epstein case. Twice they met with Ghislaine Maxwell down in Florida. And then check this out, a lot further discussion about where Russiagate goes. President Trump making some allegations over there during his Europe trip. And then I'm going to break down the UK deal, the EU deal with E.J. Antoni from the Heritage Foundation. He's their chief economist. So much to get to. By the way, if you missed it over the weekend, we always do these, call them a rant. It's something that's just off, doesn't fit in the show, and I feel passionate about. This weekend went off on Stephen Colbert and how he doesn't get math, which is why he was canceled for real. Make sure you hit subscribe and notification. You'll always get those. But before I get into our two amazing guests, I want to tell you about another great guy, my buddy Leo Grillo. Leo Grillo is the founder of Delta Rescue. He's been with this show basically since the beginning. I loved getting to meet him, getting to know him, staying in touch with him because I love the work that he does. He rescued one dog. It was a Doberman. He named it Delta, which stood for Dedication, Everlasting Love to Animals. And then that spawned what became Delta Rescue. I've told you, probably heard this story a million times. I've rescued 3 dogs. So I said, oh, Leo, I know what that's like. He's like, no, Sean, it's not a shelter. Delta Rescue is the largest no-kill sanctuary in the world. They take in dogs, cats, horses, you name it, that have been abused, malnutritioned, whatever. And it's amazing the work that goes on at Delta Rescue. If you go to deltarescue.org, you can see the videos and you'll be blown away. But here's the thing. Leo and the folks at Delta Rescue rely entirely on our donations. There's no Politico Pro subscriptions or USAID grants. I've made a personal contribution because I literally believe so much in the work that Leo Grillo and Delta Rescue are doing. Please join me in doing that. Go to deltarescue.org, make a contribution, and if you can, hit that estate planning tab and think about how you can make this an enduring mission that will go on for generations. Maybe you've got a 401k, an old stock or something that you can donate. Again, go to deltarescue.org to see what's going on. Beyond Delta Rescue, though, another great group, another great person are my friends over at Concerned Women for America. Penny Nance is the leader of the group. She's been on the show a bunch. These guys at Concerned Women for America have led the way for decades in fighting the cultural fight. And you guys, if you're a mom out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about more than probably most of us. You see what your kids face every day in this world. And for 45 years, Concerned Women for America have been on the front lines of the battle. They focus on 7 core issues: family, sanctity of life, religious liberty, parental choice and education, fighting sexual exploitation, national sovereignty, and support for Israel. CWA and Penny Nance and those folks were talking about getting men out of women's sports before it was cool. These guys are so influential. It is unbelievable. I need you to support their efforts, though. For a donation of $20 or more, you can get a copy of Penny's brand new book, A Woman's Guide, 7 Rules for Success in Business and Life, and help support the way that they are growing around the country with new chapters. Go to concernedwomen.org/Sean, concernedwomen.org/Sean. Without further introduction, I want to bring in our good friend from the Article 3 Project, Josh Hammer. Josh, good to see you. What a way to start the week, because I need to have a legal schooling on both what's going on in Epstein and in Russia, because 2 issues for different reasons that matter. So let's just start with Epstein for a second. Over the weekend, after meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell twice, the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche says that they're giving her some kind of limited immunity. So one, is that what does that mean? Why would you do that? What are they hoping for?
Well, I think the idea here, and this is a very fluid situation, there's not a whole lot that's necessarily been corroborated. There's a lot of unconfirmed rumors swirling at this time. But if I'm reading the tea leaves, Sean, correctly, my understanding is that Ghislaine Maxwell might be given some sort of secondary ancillary immunity from future prosecution after potentially her current sentence is up there. But to be clear, she is currently serving a 20-year sentence for her horrific child sex trafficking related crimes with her former lover, Jeffrey Epstein, there. And there is certainly no indication that I've gotten that this administration, this DOJ, is going to try to get her out of jail early, God forbid. That would be a terrible decision. I would be the first to excoriate it from the top of my lungs. That's not my understanding there. I think that this has to do with the potential for some sort of future prosecution, depending on what she told Todd Blanche and the DOJ in their visit to Tallahassee, Florida.
So let me get this straight from the civilian side. Basically, she's saying, yeah, I'll talk to you, Todd Blanche, Mr. Department of Justice, but I'm already serving 20 years, and I'm not going to say anything that would incriminate me to make me serve more. So anything I say, you have to basically give me immunity. Is that fair?
If I'm again, it's a very fluid situation, but if I'm understanding Sean correctly, that is basically my understanding, yes.
Okay, fine. So let's just pretend that that's the case. Why then would Ghislaine Maxwell talk further? I mean, granted, she gets immunity, but wouldn't she or her attorney in the normal course of action, if we assume that that is right, say, hey, I'm willing to help you. I'm going to give you some information, but I want my sentence reduced. I want a pardon. I want something, right? Wouldn't that be what a normal defendant or convicted felon would want?
Yes, 100%, which is why, personally, as someone who has zero interest in seeing Ghislaine Maxwell get out of jail early, my antenna were raised a little bit by this because I think that your instincts are totally spot on. I mean, if her defense lawyer was not saying those sort of things in their sit down with the DOJ there, then they were simply not doing their job as criminal defense lawyers, because that is exactly the sort of thing there. If I had to guess, and I was not a fly on the wall there, I was not privy to these ultra secret conversations, but if I had to guess, the basic way that this probably went down is that the defense lawyer probably opened by saying something along those lines. Todd Blanche and the DOJ said, okay, you're going to get immunity from future prosecution. Defense lawyer probably pushes back and says, no, I really want the possibility of a reduced sentence or something like that to be on the table. Then DOJ probably comes back and says, we'll have that conversation at the right time. I'm literally just guessing, just based on my own kind of experience clerking for a federal appeals court there and my knowledge of the legal process. But I find it extremely difficult to believe that some sort of more aggressive quid pro quo was agreed to, whether tacitly or explicitly, whereby she would have her sentence reduced. That strikes me as probably preposterous. Rather, I think that Maxwell and her lawyer are probably banking on the fact that by cooperating in some limited manner, as we saw this weekend and perhaps this week, the next 2 weeks, who knows, we'll see how it goes. I think they're banking on the fact that a judge at a future time may then view her more sympathetically, whether or not Todd Blanche and the DOJ whisper in that judge's ear or not.
Okay, and just explain to me, why wouldn't this have happened? Again, I get it. I appreciate you playing along here. But from my perspective, again, as a civilian, what I don't understand is, why wouldn't they have done that during round one? In other words, why wouldn't they have said, hey, instead of 20 years, we got some more information for you. Give us a little bit of immunity. We'll lean into it, and then we'll take a 15-year sentence or something. Why wouldn't that have already happened in the normal course of action?
Well, look, it's always possible that new information could have come to light. I mean, we've definitely. I mean, I think opinions vary, to put it mildly, as to how Attorney General Bondi and FBI Director Patel and so forth have handled this entire saga. But certainly, the second Trump administration has seemingly invested a lot of time in pouring through all the various documents and files that they are able to see. Not that they're able to see anything, because a lot of it is under seal at the grand jury stage. But it's entirely possible that new information has come to light. It's also entirely possible, Sean, prosecutorial discretion is very much a thing there. And that's not just when it comes to choosing which cases to prosecute, but it's also coming in terms of how far you want to prosecute, how much manpower there. I mean, U.S. Attorney's Office are not unlimited operation. There are a limited number of qualified, capable attorneys there. So, but necessarily, if you want to put your entire staff in XYZ office on the Ghislaine Maxwell case, that's probably inadvertently going to have the effect of diverting resources from, let's call it, immigration enforcement or drug trafficking enforcement there. That's kind of just the nature of the beast when it comes to these prosecutorial offices.
All right, two last questions, then I want to move on to Russiagate. One, a lot of people seem to be questioning whether or not she can even be believed. Like, is she a credible person? Secondly, President Trump this morning says that he thinks something might have been planted in the Epstein files. He said those files were run by the worst scum on earth. The whole thing is a hoax. They ran the files. I was running against somebody that ran the files. If they had something, it would have been released. Thoughts on both of those?
Well, I think that Trump on his second point is totally right, by the way. This is probably, I think, Trump's arguably his single strongest selling point, as the fact that he himself is not deeply implicated in the files. By the way, Sean, let me just make a slightly different legal point, actually, before answering that. As a lawyer, I have something of an objection to this entire nomenclature, this phraseology of the so-called Epstein files. I mean, what exactly are we talking about here? It's not even obvious to me. Back during the Bush administration, back around 2007, that was when Alex Acosta, the U.S. attorney, handed off the Epstein prosecution to the Palm Beach County, Florida State Attorney's Office. So does the Epstein files include that federal probe, that Palm Beach County probe? Does it only include in 2019 when the feds got re-involved? I mean, what exactly are we talking about here? So I kind of object just in general about this whole notion of the Epstein files. And again, those of us who know a thing or two about the law know that so much of this would be under seal at the grand jury stage, and a court is not going to just divulge that because the public wants to see it for XYZ reasons. That's just not how criminal procedure works. But in any event, I think that Trump is onto something there. If there was something that could be released, with that large caveat aside, if there was something that could be released and the Biden DOJ, Merrick Garland, Sean, are you freaking? I mean, these people tried to send Donald Trump to jail. They literally tried to destroy his life. I mean, look at what Jack Smith tried to do in Washington, D.C. and Florida. The classified documents case, the pre-dawn raid at Mar-a-Lago. Are you kidding me? I mean, the notion that they would have not tried to implicate Donald Trump in a global pedophilia sex trafficking ring, of course they would have done so. So I think there's actually a very strong point, frankly, in Donald Trump's defense. Your other question, if I recall, what was about Ghislaine Maxwell. I think I agree with where you're coming from. I personally would not particularly trust Ghislaine Maxwell either. I mean, this gets back to kind of the give and take between the DOJ and the criminal defense team there. Typically there, if you want to induce someone like a Maxwell to be more forthcoming there, then you have to kind of dangle some favors there, but you ultimately don't know if what they're saying is true. I mean, these are the kind of people that commit these sorts of unspeakable crimes there. They're probably gonna keep a lot of secrets and keep on lying all the way until they meet their maker on the other side of this realm there. So I definitely share your skepticism on that front as well.
All right. I want to ask a question to you that I am unequipped to answer, but came up on the morning meeting that I host with Mark Halperin and Dan Turrentine. With respect to Russiagate, if we assume that everything is true, that Barack Obama manipulated intelligence and or created to create a predicate that Donald Trump was owned or supported by Putin, okay? Halperin has said on multiple occasions now, well, what crime would he have committed? So I want to ask you as a lawyer, what crime would there have been committed? I mean, it may have been wrong. It might have been ethically, morally wrong. But is it a crime, what he would have done, if true?
So let me just first say that when it comes to President Obama himself, I hate to say it, Sean, but I will be the bearer of bad news here because I try to be honest and call it like I see it there. But Barack Obama is not getting prosecuted. I'm sorry to say it, but
because why?
Well, he's not getting prosecuted primarily because of U.S. versus Trump, because of the U.S.
Right. Okay, I just wanted to set that predicate because I think that's important. Yeah,
no, I mean, we're talking here about. I really actually do believe what Tulsi Gabbard is saying, by the way. I have long thought this has been my theory of the case since day one, the Steele dossier, Clinton campaign, Brendan Clapper. I totally buy it, actually. But if this is true, and again, I think it is, I hate to say it, but even if Barack Obama is lying through his teeth, when he is engaging in communications with the director of the CIA, John Brennan, with the DNI, Jim Clapper, with Jim Comey, with all those guys there, that is core Article 2 presidential authority. That is bread and butter executive branch stuff, commanding your intelligence community. I understand he's lying through his teeth there. It's a hoax. It's a scandal. It's disgusting behavior. But if I'm reading Trump versus U.S. correctly, and the court just gave this opinion about a year ago in a 6-3 decision, a great opinion, I think there, I think that he's immunized from that conduct. Now, having said that, if hypothetically he were not immunized, what kind of crimes might he have committed there? Well, we haven't heard a whole lot of specifics necessarily from this DOJ yet. I think the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is setting up a strike force there. We'll see what kind of criminal referrals they might be able to whip up. Again, I don't think it would be against Barack Obama himself, so don't get your hopes up for that. Some of the statutes that I've seen people whip out, I've seen some folks mention a criminal statute called 18 U.S. Code Section 242, which is a criminal conspiracy to deprive someone of his or her constitutional rights. Maybe that's a fit, maybe not entirely so. The bigger one that I've seen a lot of people throw out there, and this kind of gets to Donald Trump's own verbiage where he accuses Barack Obama of treasonous behavior there. The bigger charge is seditious conspiracy against the United States. This is a charge that many of the Washington, D.C. prosecutors there were really itching to kind of throw at the J6ers there, essentially accusing them of sedition. So I think that would be the grand charge, right? I think that's what a lot of Trump supporters would really deeply like to see a Barack Obama, John Brennan, Jim Clapper get charged with there. There are, again, immunity reasons why it's not going to happen to Obama. Unfortunately, there are also pretty potentially serious statute of limitations issues as well for the other men involved here. If I recall, that statute has a 5-year statute of limitations there. That kind of gets us into the territory of, can you start to more creatively begin the tolling of the statute of limitations, a la what Alvin Bragg did in the Stormy Daniels thing, because Alvin Bragg found a very creative, I would call it just Stalin-esque way to begin the tolling of statute of limitations of that stupid New York corporate fraud bookkeeping statute there in a way that he could get in Trump. So, we could have that conversation if you want to there, but there are potentially statute of limitations obstacles, I think, even unfortunately for Brennan and Clapper and the other guys here as well. They might be able to get Brennan potentially on a perjury charge. This is kind of the working theory of the case that I have right now there, but I'm not necessarily seeing a whole lot else at this time. I very much hope I'm wrong, by the way, on that, Sean.
I've heard some theories about going to the floor. Bank shotting it so that it ends up in Florida, and then you create. To your point, it's how you can keep the clock running, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I guess the bigger question is here. Let's just say, for hypothetical purposes, that Barack Obama can't be prosecuted and that the statute of limitations has expired. Is it still, then what? How do you get justice, or how do you make it clear what happened? How do we, I feel because look, Josh, I've said this multiple times. This is personal for me. I was in the room on January 5th when Comey briefed Trump. I was one of the handful of staffers there. I was one of the people that went through the Steele dossier. I was one of the people that went through Mueller. So to get justice and to make it clear who did all of this actually matters. And it impacted a lot of people's lives. So assuming all of the legal basis that you just laid out, then what?
No, Sean, look, I hear you loud and clear. Without naming names, I had friends in that first Trump White House who were tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt in legal fees just to lawyer up as part of the Mueller probe. What happened to folks like you, to my friend who was in the White House, what happened to Donald Trump, most importantly above all, is utterly scandalous. This is one of the dirtiest political tricks in American history. It has been since day one. And I think, by the way, the long-term repercussions of Russiagate, Sean, are actually even worse than that. Russiagate, if you go back a decade ago, was really the first of what I can identify as a series of things that have happened in America that have caused the American people to have historically low trust in institutions, in elites, and in the government itself. I can draw a direct line, frankly, from Russiagate to the bogus Trump impeachment of Zelensky in the phone call, to the COVID-19 lockdowns and the health authorities, to the contested 2020 election there, to the weaponization of the J6 prosecutions, to the Twitter files and the Hunter Biden laptop, and then of course to Democrats running a mental patient for president last year. I mean, one after the other here. And by the way, the Democrats and the media just lying through their teeth about that with the octogenarian mental patient. So I personally draw a straight line from Russiagate to all of that. So I think Russiagate is actually the provenance. It is the origins of this now decade-long systemic campaign to make the American people just utterly despise and have the historically low trust in elites institutions. And that, above all, I think, is what is the reason for this populist sentiment that is deeply on the rise all across the political spectrum, from Zohar Mamdani on the left to many folks on the right as well. Okay, with that extremely large caveat aside there, I really do hope to see criminal referrals, but part of me, Sean, is trying to brace myself for the worst, because there really are statute of limitations issues here. By the way, I think also about the way that the special counsel David Weiss handled the Hunter Biden stuff. Remember that there? I mean, David Weiss seemed to strategically let a lot of other statute of limitations expire too when it comes to Hunter Biden, when it comes to FARA, his failure to register as a foreign agent, and all sorts of other things implicating his tax and foreign dealings in Ukraine, Romania, China, and so forth there. So we've seen this play out before, where the statute of limitations toll and it gets to be a little late to actually get meaningful legal justice on the other side. Here's the best way that I can answer your question. I think that there has already been some notion of political justice that has been served there. What I mean by that is, one, that Donald Trump has come back from the political wilderness, the brink of literal death, the assassin's bullet in Pennsylvania and so forth last summer. He's now in this second term. And I think even more to the point, Barack Obama, the one man who Tulsi Gabbard, I think, is now credibly saying is really kind of the grand puppeteer of this horrific hoax and conspiracy, Barack Obama himself has been personally and politically repudiated like few American figures, I think, over the past century of American politics. If you look at the Barack Obama 2008 political coalition, this demographic coalition of the ascendant, the young, the minorities, the whatever there, it's dead. It is deader than a doorknob. And guess who destroyed it? Donald J. Trump. Donald J. Trump in 2024, if you look at the exit polling from all those demographic subgroups, millennials, Gen Z, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, he shattered the Barack Obama dream of this coalition of the demographic ascendant there. So I think that is ultimately kind of the most poetic form of justice there, but I wish I had better news for you on kind of the black letter legal justice front.
No, but I love the reality you bring to it and the explanation, because it makes sense. I think we should get our expectations in check. So, Josh, I always love when you come, you break it down and give us sort of a true north as to what we could expect. So thank you, as always, for being here and breaking it down.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You bet. All right, amazing conversation with Josh. Now I want to bring in Antoni. EJ is the chief economist over at the Heritage Foundation. But before I do that, I got to tell you, if you were out grilling or, you know what I'm talking about. I did the eggs this weekend, the omelets. I always kick in now with a little Firecracker hot salt. It is unbelievable. And if you go to firecracker.farm, not .org, not .edu, firecracker.farm, you can join me in getting one of these. This is a hot salt grinder. These guys have perfected a kick in your food. They've got 3 types of hot salt. It's Ghost, Reaper, and Scorpion. You get the gist. These are the 3 kings of hot salt. And it's not even a heat. I don't know. It's a burst of flavor. This stuff has been selling out. Megyn Kelly was talking about it. Joe Rogan was talking about it. Sold out before Father's Day. They've got limited batches back in stock right now. But I'm telling you, you just literally click on the top of that, sprinkle a little bit on whether it's steak, vegetables, eggs, or omelets, and it just adds this unbelievable kick that I've never been able to master anywhere else. It's a boom in your mouth like nothing else. And again, it's back in stock now. So go to firecracker.farm, use code SPICER for a discount just for our watchers and our listeners. It tastes incredible, beautifully made. It's a smart choice. You will thank me for this later. Firecracker.farm, code SPICER for a discount. All right, back to EJ Antoni. EJ, good to see you. What a weekend. I mean, first of all, you got a president working on the weekend. That in itself is such a change. But walk us through what you think are the highlights of this EU trade agreement and why it is or it isn't a big deal.
Oh, Sean, in terms of that last part, I think it's a huge deal. Anytime you can get not just a single country, but a bloc of countries to agree on something, that's a big deal. And when you're talking about the EU, you can never get those folks to agree on anything collectively. So Europe was really the hardest nut to crack. And the fact that the president did it and did it so quickly, I think is really astonishing. He has surprised me and really surpassed even my expectations here. So how big is this deal? Well, it's worth hundreds of billions of dollars just in the energy component. It's worth hundreds of billions of dollars more in terms of the defense contractor side, the weapons and other things that Europe has committed to buy from the United States. But maybe more importantly than that, Sean, this is going to open up countless European markets in a way that they haven't been for over 80 years. That's not an exaggeration. During the war, during World War II, obviously there were a whole host of different interruptions to trade, shall we say. But after the war, we allowed Europe to put up countless barriers to trade, whether those were tariffs or non-tariff barriers like regulations, in order to prevent the competition that the American assembly line would have imposed onto Europe. We did that to allow those countries to rebuild because we wanted a strong Western Germany, for example, when you have the Soviet threat in 1946 and beyond. But the whole world order has completely changed since then. And it is high time that those different markets in Europe have some American competition. There's no reason why, whether it's Mercedes or Audi or BMW, there's no reason why any of those car companies can't compete on a level playing field with American vehicles. And this deal is going to help allow that to happen. So it's great news for American exporters, whether they're manufacturers or farmers.
So the EU Trade Commissioner, she was talking about this, and I want to play you a clip of what she said, explaining why it's a big deal. So here is the EU Trade Commissioner herself talking about this deal. Take a look.
So I think we should not forget where we would have been on the 1st of August. We would have been at 30%. And it would have been much more difficult to get down now to the 15%. 15% is certainly a challenge for some. But we should not forget it keeps us the access to the American market. And what we are also doing intensively is diversifying to other regions of the world. And this opens up new markets, potential new markets. Indonesia, for example, is huge. It's 250 million people.
So the interesting thing, EJ, somebody said to me, because I was the assistant U.S. trade rep for 3 years. And so they said, Sean, can I ask you a question over, when this broke? They said, why didn't this happen before, right? And I said, what do you mean? They go, well, we're low, it's cheap to get into the U.S. market. We were low tariff. I mean, I'm using my words, not theirs, but they were like, it seems like we always let people in our market, and then they had high tariffs. Like, why didn't this happen before now? What's your answer to that?
Because you never had a president who wanted to fight for the American people before. You had a president who was always beholden to special interests. Ironically, it took the New York City billionaire to be the most connected with the average Joe, with the blue collar worker in this country. Again, because he wasn't dependent on those different special interests. If you listen to the Europeans today who are up in arms about this news, they are the ones who stand to lose the most because they are the ones who are so connected with those special interests in Europe that have been protected from competition for the better part of 8 decades. And so if you look at the average European, they actually really stand to benefit from this. The European consumer is now going to have access to a whole host of American products that they couldn't even buy before at any price because of those non-tariff barriers. Again, things like regulation that prevented the sale of, whether it's manufactured goods, whether it's agricultural products, it prevented the sale of those American products into Europe. And I think what you heard there from the representative for the European Union is the fact that they knew that if they went toe-to-toe in a trade war with the United States, they would lose big time. Now, look, there are no winners in trade wars. Everyone loses, but not everyone loses the same. And they would have lost far, far more. What you just heard from that woman was a kind of desperation where she's essentially saying, look, we need the American market more than they need the European market. So we have to play ball here. You can't call Trump's bluff when he's not bluffing.
That's the sort of, I'm glad you picked up on that, because she says, hey, we're not excited about 15, but it would have sucked more to get 30.
Exactly.
And also she notes that, like, yes, this was a rebalancing. They were for decades getting a sweetheart deal coming into the U.S. market and almost entirely tariff and non-tariff barrier free, and yet they were blocking our autos, our ag industry in particular, claiming, and for people who don't necessarily get this, when EJ or myself use the word non-tariff barrier, it says, okay, there might not be a tariff on, say, beef or pork going into the EU, but they create a series of regulations which are non-tariff barriers, or in the case of autos, emission standards that are almost impossible to hit. Therefore, it says, we would have let you in, but you didn't hit the wickets, which we set up so that you'd never get in, right? And so I think that's the key to understanding here, is that it's not just the tariff, but that component that he talked about. It's interesting, though, because she recognized how important this big deadline this week is going to be, right? This August 1st deadline the president set up. Now, previously, people started calling President Trump or saying his policies were like a taco. Trump always chickens out. Clearly, the message got through because she's saying we were scared that we were going to fit this. But then here's Howard Lutnick yesterday talking about what's going to happen on August 1st to everyone else who hasn't cut a deal. Take a look.
So no extensions, no more grace periods. August 1st, the tariffs are set. They'll go into place. Customs will start collecting the money, and off we go. Obviously, after August 1st, people can still talk to President Trump. I mean, he's always willing to listen. And between now and then, I think the president's going to talk to a lot of people. Whether they can make him happy is another question, but the president's definitely willing to negotiate and talk to the big economies, for sure.
So, EJ, I wanted to start with this. How do you see, like, August 1st going? Like, what do you anticipate happening before then and then right afterwards in terms of the market or deals?
Well, Sean, I would not be surprised if just in the next couple of days you see an increased amount of talk. In other words, a lot more conversations that different nations are going to get desperate here, because everybody knows the sooner you make a deal, the better it's going to be. If you're the last man left standing, so to speak, in other words, in this game of musical chairs, if you're left to the end, you don't get a chair. You get the worst deal of all. And so increasingly, as you get these big economies, whether it's Japan, whether it's the EU, as you get all of those ducks in a row, it puts even more pressure on those nations that are left to come to the table and to make a deal, to hammer something out with the United States, even if it's not the best thing ever for those nations, even if they have to make an increasing amount of concessions. The alternative, as you just pointed out, Sean, is going to be much, much worse. For Europe, it was 15% instead of 30%. For other nations, it's going to be a heck of a lot higher than 30%. So
how is that baked into the market? How's the market going to react? I mean, let's just say there's another 90 countries that are trying to get a deal. I've always said that the bandwidth is part of the problem. Like, there's only so much staff that can deal with these. So some folks, to your point about musical chairs, aren't going to be able to have a chair on the end of COB on August 1st. Mm-hmm. Do the markets take that into consideration? Is it already baked in? Is there going to be a problem the next day? Well, markets certainly taken into consideration. And look, there are competing forces here within markets. And that's why you have these price fluctuations. You mentioned the whole taco phenomenon. Look, if everyone really believed taco, then you wouldn't have had Toyota stock rallying after the Japan deal, where their stock literally had their best day in 38 years. That would not have happened if everyone thought, Trump's going to chicken out and it's all for show. No, some people certainly believe this is real. I think the reason for that is because it is real at the end of the day. And it gets increasingly real the more nations make deals. The reason for that, Sean, is because if the United States had to go into a global trade war where we fought literally everybody, that would cause a tremendous amount of economic harm here at home. But as you get more and more of these nations to cut deals, if you do have a trade war, it's with fewer and fewer countries, which reduces the economic harm at home more and more. In other words, you're actually more likely to have a trade war with the few countries that remain, because we don't have much to lose at that point. So again, I think markets are pricing in reality here, which is that the more nations that we get deals with,
the more likely that we're going to go into some kind of trade war with the ones that remain, which also puts more pressure on those nations, as we just said.
EJ, I get a kick. I've been saying this for months now, but the so-called experts, when Trump came out initially and said, I'm going to do this stuff with tariffs, I'm going to have a 10% tariff floor, et cetera, they were like, the economy's going to go into a tailspin, everything's going to go nuts, inflation's going to go through the roof. None of it happened. In fact, if you actually read Political Playbook today, they keep talking about like it's inevitable, like it's going to happen, like it's a matter of time before everything goes nuts. I get a kick whether it's budget projections, tariff projections, economic projections, they're all wrong. They're all wrong. And why are we continuing to, not we, some in the media, I mean, like the media keeps turning to the same people that are wrong and saying what's going to happen. The tariffs haven't caused any adverse. In fact, they brought in a ton of revenue that no one anticipated. We had our first surplus as a government in the month of June. And yet no one's saying either I was wrong or, wow, Trump was right. I mean, it's instead, we're going to keep doubling down on stupid and saying, when will it all break?
You know, Sean, you might say the lack of inflation today is transitory, is what these people want you to believe, in the same way they wanted you to believe that inflation under Biden was only transitory, right? They're like, no, just keep waiting. It'll change. We promise. The same people who predicted catastrophic inflation under Trump and some kind of economic collapse also told us exactly the opposite under Biden, right? They said all of this profligate runaway spending is not going to cause any inflation. It gave us the worst inflation in 40 years. So these folks are always wrong. They're perpetually wrong, never in doubt. And Trump is proving them wrong because at the end of the day, Sean, I think most of these so-called experts are just ivory tower academics. And look, I taught at the college level, so it's not like I have anything against academics. I was one. But at the same time, if that's all you do, if you never have any real world experience, if you never actually have to test your theories against hard reality, if you can keep yourself perpetually in that ivory tower, then you can be wrong all the time and not have to suffer any consequences from it. And I think that's largely what we're observing today. If you look at something like the Federal Reserve, for example, there's over 300 PhD economists there who are constantly getting things wrong, and yet they all still have a job. And I think it's largely because they're allowed to remain in a purely academic setting. Right. And again, they never have to test their theories against the real world.
I want to get to the Fed in a second because I think that's important. But do you think that, based on your history, like if you were at an academic institution still and you saw the impact that the tariffs are having, in the sense that they're not causing inflation, they're bringing in billions of dollars of new revenue, would that give you pause to say, and I'm being serious, like at what point do people say, you know what, we've now seen it in practice, maybe the theories were wrong and there is something to be said for these tariffs and the impact that they can have budget-wise, economic-wise?
Well, Sean, I never underestimate academics' ability to excuse themselves for why they were wrong and to try to explain away why their theory didn't work. Because, and look, part of the issue here is simply the reality that not only an American economy of 330 million people, but a global economy of billions of people is incredibly complex, and you constantly have counter forces at work. In other words, you have something that puts upward pressure on a price, and you have something that simultaneously puts downward pressure on a price, and which way the price moves depends on the magnitude of each of those, right? Which one outweighs the other. So it is true that you're always going to have multiple things at work at one time. That's a reason why when people do things like a univariate analysis, it's kind of silly when they say, no, A is the only thing affecting B, and I can explain all of B by just looking at A. That's nonsense, right? And unfortunately, that's what academics. Those are the kinds of traps in which academics can fall when it's convenient for them, and then when it's not convenient for them, they will point out that it turns out C, D, E, and F also affect B, and that's what those those are the things to which we will attribute this change. So again, unless people actually have to deal with the ramifications of their own actions, Sean, it's amazing how much of those actions they can excuse away and stay in that kind of ivory tower bubble, if you will.
It's funny you say that, and you brought up that example. That was literally one of my college experiences where in Econ 201 or whatever it was, they kept talking about like housing remains constant. And I would argue with the professor, not knowing much about it. I'd say, it's impossible. How can you say you're doing all these other things in the equation that housing would stay constant? It wouldn't. More people are coming into the market. The demand would go up, the cost. And he'd be like, but our model, and I'd say, it just, in my head doesn't work like that. And so the professor and I never saw eye to eye because I was like, that, you can't do that. And he was like, well, for the sake of the model, we are. And I'm like, okay. But I want to ask you something interesting. Over the weekend, I was listening to an interview that my buddy Charlie Kirk had given with Tucker Carlson, another friend, by the way. And Charlie brought up a phenomena that I wanted to ask you about because it's fascinating. There is this, I don't even know, trend maybe that you would call it with younger Americans right now. Buy now, pay later. Okay. And Charlie was talking about all these firms, Klarna, a firm where you go buy this, a pizza was the example that he gave. And instead of paying for the pizza, like $20 or, whatever, you would immediately agree to set up installment payments. And it's going on. And his point, the larger point that he was making is this next generation is going to lose out because they're being taught just buy now and spread out the payments as opposed to save. And so things like owning a home are going to get out of reach for them. And he was talking about how concerning it is as an issue for the next generation, a generation of voters who helped put Donald Trump in office and the Republicans. And he was like, we need to start paying more attention to them. So can you just speak broadly to the phenomena? Like, is this something that we need to be concerned about? And if so, how would we address it?
Sean, it's a very real concern. I'm so glad you brought this up. This is one of the problems with inflation. It actually creates a kind of moral rot in a society, and it gets people addicted to debt, and it puts them on that debt treadmill, which is a kind of slavery, really. This, believe it or not, is part of what broke down German culture during the interwar period and set the stage for Adolf Hitler. Now, look, I'm not saying we're Weimar Germany today, right? I'm not saying we're going to have an Adolf Hitler here in the United States. So I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, but I'm simply pointing out that the effect was exactly the same, even if the magnitude was much greater back then than it is today. If you think about it, Sean, why would I save money? Why would I put money in the bank and wait and go through the pain of having to wait, delayed gratification, when the money I have in the bank is constantly losing value? It's as if it's constantly shrinking. I'm being taxed essentially for saving my money. That's how inflation operates. It's a penalty on savers. It's a penalty on wage earners, et cetera, and people on a fixed income even. So what it encourages you to do is to simply spend all your money. And actually, it's even worse than that. It encourages you to go into debt, because if you take out money today, the money has to be repaid in the future. But when it is repaid in the future, the value of that money has actually decreased. I mean, I know folks who have a 2% mortgage today, 2% interest rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage that they got in 2021, and they're basically stealing from the bank at this point because they're paying back money that is worth far less than the money they borrowed because of the horrible inflation we had for 4 years. Okay, so what we've essentially done to the younger generation is we have implicitly taught them not to save, not to engage in this mature act of delayed gratification. We've instead told them to do the opposite, go for instant gratification, which has all kinds of moral implications for other aspects of their life. But we have financially taught them, go for instant gratification. Don't worry about the future. In fact, you're better off that way. You're better off going into debt. You're better off not saving. This is really, really bad culturally, not just financially, but culturally for the next generation. And again, it's putting them on that debt treadmill that they will just be on for the rest of their life. And I believe in that interview, they even mentioned the one scripture quote that the borrower is slave to the lender. That's very, very real, Sean. I can't overestimate just how real that is. And again, how dangerous this is for the youngest generation.
Yeah, it was eye-opening. And that brings up the last thing I want to talk to you about is the Fed's meeting this week. President Trump's very clear he wants the Fed to cut rates. He was at the Fed last week, I think setting the predicate for if I need cause to fire you, I can. I understand that the economic world was pointing towards a 25 basis point cut for September. Trump today, this morning in his meeting with Starmer, seemed to think, well, this week, I hope that they cut it. Based on your read, one, should we expect a cut this week? And if not, do you agree with me that starts to, I think that's a higher indication that Powell may get fired?
I don't think we're going to get a cut anytime soon, frankly, Sean, because
really at
Powell
all. You don't. What about September? Not at all.
Not given the current data. Now we'll see if we get some substantial weakening in the labor market between now and then. If we get several months in a row of low or no inflation, then we might actually get that cut in September. But the problem is there's so much animosity right now between Trump and between the Fed. And some of that is deserved, by the way. I think there are a lot of reasons the president should be mad at the central bank and at the clowns that run it. But whatever the case, there's so much animosity there. They're not in any mood to do him any favors and will look for any excuse they can, I think, to not reduce interest rates. And the things that they look at, they're really silly indicators, but this is what they look at. They look at the strength of the labor market and say, well, if there's a strong labor market, then we have to keep interest rates high. Why? They think economic growth causes inflation, Sean. These people are insane, but these are the kinds of flawed Keynesian models that it's the kinds of flawed Keynesian thinking that that we have to deal with at the Fed. It's a big reason why not just Powell, but the whole institution really needs to go. You need to clean house there and get different people in to run it. And they need a much narrower mission. But whatever the case, I think they have a lot of indicators at which they can point to say, no, we're not going to cut rates. They can point to continued strength in the labor market, that we're still adding so many jobs, and say, nope, the labor market's too strong. We're not going to cut rates. They can point to the number of job openings in the country and say, nope, we're not going to cut rates. And as long as you have at least, even if it's not horrible inflation, as long as you have at least some inflation, I think they'll point to that and say, we need to be more cautious. We need more improvement on inflation. Note, they'll never give you a number, right? When Powell was asked last year, how much confidence do you need? Like, give us a number. What are the figures you're looking for? He goes, well, it's not necessarily a precise figure. We're just looking for not just confidence, but more confidence. Could you be any more amorphous? Could you be any more ambiguous? No, he couldn't. And that's intentional. They don't want they don't want to give you a standard to which you can hold them accountable.
Fascinating. EJ, always appreciate your insights. Thanks for joining us. And we'll keep an eye on that Fed movement this week.
Oh, thank you for having me, Sean. It really was a pleasure.
You bet. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Remember, always go to SeanSpicer.com for the latest. We got a big week ahead. Robert Cahaley's going to be here later in the week to break down the latest in polls. So much more to get to. Thanks for kicking off your week with us. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.